Hello, this is Jake Douglas, Business 250 Principles of Economics, and Chapter 5, we're going to talk about elasticity. So elasticity is how one variable responds when another variable changes. In 2008, during the American financial crisis, gasoline prices started to go up in the United States, and they kept going up. This was due to America having bad relations and political instability in the Middle East, where America mostly imported our fuel at the time, coupled with India and China's growing economies demanding more fuel. In the summer of 2008, gas was $4 per gallon on average in America. So today that price is only found in major cities, but this was almost 20 years ago and was almost 3 times as expensive as it was only one year before that. So if you drove a car back then, how did you react to this increase in prices? Well, most of us just dealt with it. We needed gas to get to our jobs and for our day-to-day living. Most people just cannot suddenly stop buying gas and have the same standard of living. But Americans did respond in some way by buying more gas-efficient vehicles and stopped buying large SUVs long term. So in the short term, Americans dealt with the increase in price, but over the long term, they made adjustments to decrease their dependency on fuel. So contrast that to chewing gum. What if the price of gum tripled? Would your standard of living change any, if at all? Probably not, because Americans do not depend on gum as much as we depend on gas, and we would just stop buying it and replace it with something else to chew on, and we'd be fine. So we have two products, two very different reactions to how the prices of those products goes up or down. So we call that elasticity, how one variable responds when another variable changes. Elasticity helps us measure the change in quantity demanded by consumers when changes occur that affect the price of a product. So we can measure elasticity in a lot of ways. If the price of a medication goes up, how much will sales go down? During a recession, when people's incomes go down, how much will car sales go down? So elasticity is a simple concept, but it tells economists a lot about a product and helps us make good predictions. Knowing a product's price elasticity allows economists to predict the amount by which quantities demanded go down for a product if the price goes up or down. So we can equate these changes into a percentage. So economists can then compare the elasticity percentages of different products against each other. So we already know that as the price for product goes up, the quantity demanded by consumers go down. We know that's the law of demand. But how much less does it go down? Can we put a number on that? And yes, and that is exactly what knowing the elasticity of a product does. So let's go back to that baking business you had in chapter 2. So if you increase the price of your donuts by 25 cents and all of your customers leave, you know that is not a good idea. You'll go out of business. Your customers have all went to another bakery for their donuts, or they've stopped eating donuts altogether. If that 25% increase leads to a majority of your customers leaving, not all of them, you still know that raising the price of donuts was a bad idea. However, if your price increase only has a few customers leave, and the change in price also brings in more revenue to your bakery, well, that changes things. Then raising the price of your donuts makes sense. Why? Because it made your business more money even though you lost a few customers. So from a business perspective, increasing the price of your donuts was a success. So understanding elasticity helps us understand the impact that changing the price of a product has on the quantity demanded by customers. So we're going to talk about 3 different elasticity demand. The first one is going to be price elasticity. Price elasticity of demand is a measure of how responsive quantity demanded is of a product to a change in the price of that product. So there is a formula for this. It is elasticity equals the percent change in quantity and divided by the percent change in price. So a basic example is, let's say you own a fruit farm and you increase the sales price of your strawberries by 5%. So we're increasing the sales price 5%. 1 month later, your monthly sales of strawberries fell by 10%. So the quantity bought by customers went down 10%. What is the elasticity of demand? So we're going to take our percent change in quantity divided by percent change in price. We know that is you went down 10%, so a negative 10. We're going to divide that by 5%, your 5% increase, and we have a number of negative 2. And we're actually going to change it into a positive value of 2. So why is it 2 and not negative 2? It's because price elasticity of demand is always a negative number, but we're going to use the absolute value. The reason it's always a negative value is because the number is reflective of the demand curve. The slope goes down, so it's negative. But despite that, economists refer to the price elasticity of demand as a positive. They use the absolute number, which means the non-negative number. Why? Well, it's just easier. So ignore the minus sign when calculating price elasticity of demand. So let's try another example. You own a car dealership. You decrease the cost of last year's SUV model by 20% for the entire year. So next year, when you review car sales for this SUV, the number of SUVs sold of that model increased 20%. So the price went down 20%, quantity demanded goes up 20%. What is the elasticity? So percent change in quantity divided by percent change in price. We have 20 divided by 20, and we get 1. So what does that 1 or 2 mean? Well, if the elasticity is 1, for every 1% increase in price, the quantity demanded drops 1%. The 1 is 1%. For every 1% decrease in price, the quantity demanded will go up 1%. So in our strawberries example, our elasticity was 2. So for every 1% increase in the price of strawberries, the quantity demanded by customers will go down 2%. On the flip side, for every 1% decrease in the price of strawberries, the quantity demanded by customers will go up 2%. So the issue with knowing elasticity is that most often we don't get those percentages to start out with. We don't get a 5% increase, 10% decrease. We usually have to figure that out first. So how do we do that? So we do that with a bit of math. And to find the percentage change of a price, we need to know the price difference of what the old price is and the new one is. So the percent change is going to be the new price minus the old price, and then we're going to divide that back into the old price. So for example, your fruit farm sells strawberries for $2 per package. You increase the price by $1. Now they are $3. So how do you find the percent change? We're going to take the percent change and we're going to take the new price minus the old price, which is 1. We're going to divide that by 2, again the old price. So 1 divided by 2, we get 0.50, which is 50%. So we know that from increasing your strawberries price from $2 to $3, you have increased the price of your strawberries by 50%. Now that we have that percentage, now we can use that in our previous slide where we're actually completing the calculation to get price elasticity. So why do we measure in percentages instead of a specific number? Why do we say 10% or 5%? Why do we want to measure in that way? Well, because comparing changes in price, which is dollars in America, and sales or quantity of many products doesn't really tell us anything. So if somebody says gas, hamburgers, and plane tickets all went up $1 last month, that doesn't tell us anything. But if we say gas went up 50%, hamburgers went up 40%, and plane tickets went up 1% last month, that tells us something. And that's why we use percentages when understanding price elasticity. All products have some price elasticity of demand. When price goes up, demand goes down, law of demand. But buyers are more responsive to changes in price of some products more than others. So economists label these types of goods as elastic, inelastic, or unitary elastic. We have 3 different categories when we talk about price elasticity. Elastic products, elastic demands are products that are very responsive to changes in price. The percent change in quantity demanded is always higher than the percent change in price. So products that have a lot of substitutions are usually elastic items. Soda, toilet paper, water, and cereal as examples. When the price of these goes up, buyers have a lot of substitute options. That is what elastic products are. Inelastic products are products that are not very responsive to changes in price. The percent change in quantity demanded is always lower than the percent change in the price. So products that have very few substitutes are usually inelastic. So we want to talk about insulin for diabetics, gasoline for our cars, or tobacco for smokers or chewers. So when the price of these go up, buyers have few or zero options to replace the product. When we talk about few or zero substitutes with gas, for example, gasoline itself is inelastic because it's very hard to substitute gas. When gas is expensive, most people cannot just go buy a hybrid or electric vehicle to replace the use of gas. But keep in mind that you can get gas at many different gas stations like Casey's, BP, Shell. Brand choice for gasoline is elastic because there's many different substitutes for your brand, but gasoline itself is inelastic because there's few to zero substitutes to use gas. So understand the difference between the elasticity of a product by itself or the elasticity of the brand. So here we see 2 graphs of perfect elasticities. Perfectly inelastic, which is going straight up and down, and perfectly elastic, which is going perfectly flat horizontally. If a product is perfectly inelastic, it doesn't matter the price of the product, consumers will buy the same quantities. So we see the price range on the y-axis going all the way up and down. But we also see the quantity Q on the x-axis. It doesn't move at all. It doesn't go left or right. So it doesn't matter what the price is of a perfectly inelastic item. People are going to buy it no matter what the price. Now let's look at perfectly elastic. We see that the price must be this price, and it cannot change at all. It does not go higher or lower, and the demand can change all the time, really infinity. So that is the difference between perfectly inelastic and perfectly elastic. Now, also keep in mind there are very, very few products that are perfectly elastic or inelastic. So on the left, let's think about cereal. Cereal has a lot of substitutes for breakfast. You can get pancakes, breakfast bars, other things like that. So we would consider it very elastic. So our graph shows that even a small change in the price greatly changes the quantities that people will buy. In the middle, let's talk about like Kleenex, tissues. They have less substitutes than cereal, but there are still substitutes like toilet paper, paper towels, washcloths to, blow your nose. So it's still elastic, but not as high as what cereal would be. So as the price changes, the quantities do change, but not by much. So people will still buy Kleenex if the price changes, but they have a few options. So you'll notice if this is less inelastic than cereal, you're going to see that the demand curve is going to be more up and down. The more elastic, the more left and right it's going to be. So on the right, let's think about gasoline. So we have very few to zero substitutes, and most people pay any price for gas. So that makes it inelastic. So any change in price is not going to change the quantity demanded by the buyers. So we have elastic, inelastic, and our third category is unitary elastic. So unitary elastic demands are products where the percent change in quantity and the percent change in price are always the same or equal. There are not many products out there that are unitary elastic, but if we wanted to consider a couple, we would probably think of clothes and household appliances like fridges and dishwashers. So just to summarize, price elasticity of demand, we have elastic products, which are where the price elasticity of demand, that when we do that equation, if the number is greater than 1, we're going to consider the product as elastic. For inelastic products, if the product is less than 1, if the elasticity of demand is less than 1, that final number we get, we're going to call that inelastic. For unitary elastic products, that final number is always going to be close to, if not 1 exactly. So back to our strawberries, our elasticity was 2. Would we call that elastic or inelastic? Well, we would call it elastic because it's greater than 1. So that tells us that if the price changes of strawberries, the quantity demanded is going to be extremely responsive. What about our car dealership where we changed the prices of SUVs? Well, our elasticity was 1, so we would call that unitary elastic. The price went up 20%, the price went down 20%, the sales went up 20%. That's apples to apples, 20 and 20, so that's equal. So there are determinants of elasticity, and we actually have 4 of them. So you may remember that supply and demand has determinants, not price, that changes the prices and quantities of a product. So elasticity also has those determinants, and we have 4 of them, and they are substitutability, proportion of income spent, time period, and luxuries versus necessities. So substitutability is the more alternatives a product has, the easier it is for buyers to switch to another product, making the product more elastic. So think of beef, chicken, pork, fish. It's easy to switch meats if one gets too high in price. Proportion of income spent. So the smaller percentage of your paycheck you spend on a product, the less elastic it is. So think about it. If salt goes up 25%, you're still going to buy salt because the price of it is a very small part of your income. If a new car goes up 25%, you're probably going to look at other options because the proportion of your income spent on a new car is very high, making a new car more elastic. You're going to go find substitutes for a new car, for a brand new car. Time period. So when a buyer has more time to adjust their consumption patterns, the products they buy can be more elastic and they can make substitutions. If they have little time to adjust, a product could be more inelastic. So going back to gasoline earlier, you cannot adjust your consumption habits very quickly to a new form of transportation. So that reason is why gasoline is seen as inelastic. Gas is much harder to substitute. And finally, we have luxuries versus necessities. Luxury products tend to be more elastic with more substitutions available. So necessities like food, electricity, and healthcare are more important to everyday life, and the buyer's quantity demanded does not change much when the price goes up on food, electricity, and healthcare just in general. So this is a graphic from our book that shows types of products and whether they are usually considered inelastic, elastic, or roughly unitary elastic. So think about these products and consider if that the particular item went up in price, would you look for other options or buy it regardless of how much it costs? So total revenue is how much money your firm, your business generates before expenses. And we can calculate revenue by the price of an item times the quantity you've sold of it. So for example, if we have a price of $1.50 per donut, you run a bakery shop, and you sell 500 donuts in a month, that's your quantity, 1.5, $1.50 times 500 donuts, that means your total revenue was $750 for the month. So if a product is elastic, we know that the quantity demanded decreases when the price goes up because there are substitutes. That means total revenue is going to go down. You're going to most likely lose sales. For inelastic products, when the price rises, we know that buyers are still going to buy the item because there's no substitutes. And for these items, total revenue usually rises when prices also rise. So go back to cereal. We know it's elastic because there's lots of substitutes. We also know that for elastic items, when the price goes up, it greatly changes the quantity demanded from buyers. So knowing this, total revenue will go down for the firm selling cereal if they increase the price of cereal. Why? Because they won't sell as much cereal and they'll lose sales. But for an inelastic product like gas, if gas goes up in price, this will actually increase revenue. Why? Because buyers won't buy less gas even if the price goes up. There are few or zero substitutes for it. So, if inelastic items create more total revenue for a business, if they just simply increase the price, why don't all firms just sell inelastic items? Well, they don't usually do that because as sales rise, so does the supply. Sellers make more to make more money. Now, sales may go up moderately, but the law of demand tells us that as price keeps going up, demand will eventually go down. If demand goes down, then the supply goes back down, then total revenue goes down. So buyers will buy more of the product for a while, but not enough to pay the firm for the decline in price. So long term, it does not make sense to continuously sell inelastic items because eventually buyers will catch on and they will find substitutes. So this graphic tells us that the more inelastic item that we are talking about, usually the more revenue that's to be gained with price and quantity, as opposed to if you have an elastic item and you increase the price of it, the revenue gain is going to be much smaller. So to summarize price elasticity of demand, products and firms with price elastic demand will see their sales change dramatically from small price changes. Their revenue loss can greatly exceed the revenue gained if they increase prices. However, if prices go down on elastic items, sales have the potential to expand rapidly and increase total revenue quickly. So that is one benefit of elastic items. If you lower the price, demand could increase exponentially, which would bring in more revenue. So graphing elasticity, know that the same product can be elastic, unitary elastic, or inelastic, depending on the price of the product. So when the price of a product is low, a 1 unit change in price is a large percentage. If you go from 1 to 2, that's a large percentage. But this percentage change in the quantity is small, so that makes the product inelastic, a small change when the price changes. When the price of a product is high, it's the opposite. There isn't a large increase or decrease in the price percentage, like say going from $19 to $20, but there will be a large percent change in the quantity. So now the product is elastic. In the middle, we see unitary elastic. If the price changes in this area, the quantity changed is the same or close to it. So our second type of elasticity is income elasticity, and that is the price uh, measures how responsive quantities change when a consumer's income changes. So this isn't about a price change of an item, this is about the consumer's income. Income elasticity also has a formula, and that is the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in an individual's income. So the value we get will either be less than 0, greater than 1, or we will get a negative number. So based on that value that we get, positive, negative, or uh, less than 1, we have three different categories. We have normal goods, which is a positive number but less than 1. So when the income goes up, quantity demanded goes up, but less than the rise of income, which is most products that we sell. So for normal goods, if your income doubles, you'll probably buy more of a normal good, but you're not going to buy twice as much of it. So that's what it means by the quantity demanded going up, but still less than the rise in your income. Luxury goods are a positive value and always greater than one. So when income goes up, quantity demanded goes up, and it goes up more than the rise of the income. So vacations, high-priced vehicles, things like that. For inferior goods, that is going to be a negative value, and when the income goes up, quantity demanded goes down, like public transportation. So we talked about inferior goods earlier in a previous chapter. When your income goes up, you no longer use certain products, or you replace them with something you believe is better. So for income elasticity, we do show the negative sign for the inferior goods. So if it is a negative number, we do not change it to a positive. We need to know if it's a negative number so we can call it an inferior good. Businesses that make all three types of products like to know which of their products fall into each category so they can tailor their production to maximize their sales. So if an economy is going well, they will want to produce more luxury goods. If an economy is not doing well, they will produce more inferior goods as incomes go down. Our final elasticity is cross-elasticity. Cross-elasticity of demand measures how responsive the quantity demanded of a product is when a different product changes price. So now it's not the same product changing price, this is a different product changing price. So cross-elasticity of demand also has a formula, and that is the percent change in the quantity demanded of one product, and we divide that by the percent change in price of another product. So once we know the cross-elasticity of a product, we can put the product in one of two categories. It's either going to be a positive value or a negative value. Substitutes are products that replace each other, and they're going to have a positive value, like coffee and tea or chicken and pork. So if the price of one goes up, the quantity will change of the other product. Complements, on the other hand, are a negative value, and those are products that are consumed together, such as hot dogs and buns or vehicles and gas. And we can see over here on the right with the substitute, if an increase in price happens for product A, that means product B actually increases demand because there's a substitute. On the other hand, for complements, if there is an increase in one product, the demand for the other product is going to go down. Why? Because they tend to go together, hot dogs and buns. If the price of hot dogs goes up, most likely the decrease for hot dog buns is going to go down. So summarizing elasticity of demand, we have price elasticity, which measures how responsive quantity demanded is to a product changing price, and that can be elastic, inelastic, or unitary elastic. Income elasticity of demand measures how responsive quantities change when a consumer's income changes. It can be a normal good, luxury good, or an inferior good. Cross elasticity of demand measures how responsive the quantity demanded of a product is when a different product changes price, and that can be either a substitute or a complementary good. So elasticity of supply. So price elasticity of supply measures the responsiveness of quantities supplied by sellers to changes in the price of a product. So there is a formula to find this, and that is the price elasticity of supply equals the percent change in quantity supplied divided by the percent change in the price. So opposite the price elasticity of demand, this is price elasticity of supply, and it is always a positive number. So once we know the price elasticity of supply value, we can put a product into one of three groups. And that's going to be either elastic, inelastic, or unitary elastic supply. Elastic supply, the value is greater than 1, where the change in quantity supplied by suppliers is higher than the change in price of the product. Inelastic supply, the value is going to be less than 1. The change in quantity supplied by suppliers is less than the change in price of the product. Or unitary elastic, which is exactly 1 or very close to it, and that is the change in quantity supplied by suppliers is equal to the change in price of the product. Elasticity of supply has one determinant, and that one determinant is time. Why? Because firms require time to respond to changes in market prices. So firms have to alter both their fixed costs and their variable costs to change production. They may need to hire more workers or buy more equipment or build a new facility. So all those things take time. So with time, economists have three different categories of time: the market period, the short run, and the long run. The market period is a time frame that is so short that the output and number of firms are a fixed amount. For example, when farmers harvest crops, that's a market period. The time period is short and the number of farmers doesn't really change, if at all. Another example is firms that have a product that becomes popular very quickly. There is not enough time for the market to react, so the output and number of firms are typically fixed. So in a market period, there is no time to change production levels to respond to changes in price, either from current producers or to bring in new ones. So changes in demand over a market period can be devastating for suppliers, especially if a firm is selling something that expires like fruit or milk. So if demand falls, perishable products cannot just be stored away until demand comes back. The supplier must either decrease the price so the product sells, or the product is thrown in the trash, meaning they made zero money from it. In a short run, manufacturing capacity and the number of firms in the industry cannot change, but active firms, firms that are already selling the product, can change the amount of labor or materials or other resources to adjust to demand changes. Now, there is no specific number to a short run, like 1 week or 1 month. It only means that the new suppliers won't appear and current suppliers can't change their manufacturing capacity. Restaurants can hire workers relatively quickly. Car assembly plants cannot hire quickly, so they're going to have different short runs. So a short run differs depending on the industry. In the long run, the time period is long enough for firms to change their manufacturing capacities and for new firms to come in. So the long run also means some firms may leave the industry too. So some industries face added costs as they expand, like the vehicle industries. As they expand, they have to create new facilities, new assembly lines, while others face little to no extra costs, like a coffee shop. If you want to expand your business, you could buy a new espresso maker, much cheaper than expanding in a car manufacturer or in the fast food industry. So elasticity in taxes. So on average, American families pay 40% or more of their income in taxes. This can include income tax, property tax, sales tax, excise taxes, which an excise is applied to only a specific product like tobacco. So understanding elasticity helps government regulators determine the impact of taxes on individuals and families. The incidence of taxation refers to who bears the economic burden of a tax, not just who's paying for it. So the individual, group, or business that bears the burden of a specific tax will depend on the price elasticities of supply and demand that we talked about. So one group may pay a specific tax, but another group may bear the economic burden of the same tax, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So knowing price elasticities can help policymakers shift that burden between groups. So in this example, the government adds an excise tax to baskets of strawberries. So on the left, we have an untaxed strawberry market. We have supply and demand, we have a consumer surplus and a producer surplus. Well, let's say the government comes in and adds an excise tax to baskets of strawberries of 25 cents, which is paid by the supplier. So this adds 25 cents to the cost of each basket of strawberries because the supplier is going to carry that 25 cents over to the customer. They don't want to lose money. So this drives a wedge between what buyers will pay and what growers are going to receive. So for elastic products, buyers are just going to go elsewhere. And what that does is the supply curve shifts upward to reflect the 25% increase, and buyers and sellers lose their surpluses. So what we see here is a much smaller surplus for both consumers and producers. We have the blue area, which is the tax revenue that the government's now receiving that the consumers and producers don't get. And then we have what we call deadweight loss, which we'll talk about in a moment. So taxes on elastic items. So the takeaway from taxes and their impact on elastic items is if taxes are created on a product, it will alter the consumer and producer surplus. It will also create deadweight loss, or the loss of consumer and producer surplus because of the tax. So since the product is elastic, consumers will buy elsewhere, meaning the supplier bears the cost of the tax. So for elastic items, buyers go elsewhere, meaning the supplier bears that cost of the tax. Not only are they paying for it, they're also bearing the burden of it. Taxes on inelastic items, on the other hand, the tax burden is on the buyers, not the sellers. Well, how? Because inelastic items have little to no substitutes, buyers will buy no matter the cost. They have nowhere else to go. So yes, suppliers do pay the tax, but they can increase their prices knowing that buyers are still going to buy their product. So now the buyer has the burden of the tax. So with all that said about taxes and how it affects demand, for inelastic products, buyers still buy products no matter the cost. So when a tax is put on an inelastic product, the tax generates a lot of money for the government because buyers are still buying it. For elastic products, buyers can go elsewhere. So if they buy less of a product, that means less products are sold, meaning less taxes for the government. So governments would rather add taxes on inelastic items than elastic items. Why? Because the government gets more money. So now we can get an idea of the reason politicians want to tax certain items like cigarettes, alcohol, and gas, because they know buyers will still buy these items, and the government will generate more tax revenue from these types of items. If the government taxes the elastic items like strawberries or cereal, people will just buy substitutes for strawberries and cereal. If the taxed products don't sell, then the government doesn't receive any tax money from them. So with all that said about taxes and how it affects demand from buyers, taxes also affect supply. So just like demand, whoever bears the burden of a tax depends on whether the product taxed is elastic or inelastic. And just like demand, when a tax is placed on a product, there will be deadweight loss that reduces both the consumer and producer surplus. So no one benefits in certain price and quantity ranges. So when a tax is set on a product supply, that shifts the supply curve. So for an elastic product, the burden of the tax is on the buyers because they have to pay higher prices. So for an inelastic product, the burden of the tax is on the sellers. So the more elastic a product, the more deadweight loss is going to occur. So for all these scenarios of taxes affecting supply and demand, there is a constant. The equilibrium always changes, whether the tax burden is on the buyers, sellers, or both. All taxes generate a wedge in the market, and we call that wedge deadweight loss. And no one in society benefits from deadweight loss. But the government does get their tax money. And the more elastic the demand or supply is of an item, the greater the deadweight loss. So one final summary on inelastic and elastic products. So for inelastic products, as prices rise, consumers have no choice but to buy them at higher prices. Why? Because there's no substitutes for the product. Consumers pay more and suppliers can still produce the same amount, and employment stays the same. For elastic products, as prices rise, consumers can substitute the product. Prices will not go up as high as inelastic items because buyers will leave, and the supplier may start to produce less because they lose money, which could mean lower unemployment. If suppliers are not making money, they usually have to cut costs, and that could reduce employment. So our case study is on various studies on elasticity. And this is just a very small compendium of case studies where elasticity was involved. So this first one is from Reed College, where they have a short write-up talking about elasticity of demand, attempting to measure how sensitive the quantity of a product demanded is to the main variables that affect it. The price of the product, consumers' incomes, and the prices of other related products. So one of the most significant products that all of your families have in one way or another for this college's case study is education. So having just made this decision as a consumer with Reed College, you may be more familiar with the process of choosing a product. So here Reed College talks about the aspects of higher education that make it a unique product. So first, the process of buying higher education involves multiple steps and decisions of both buyers and sellers. So unlike a prospective buyer at a fast food restaurant, prospective students at selective colleges and universities must apply for admission to their institutions of interest, and depending on their academic credentials, may or may not be granted the privilege of purchasing the product. So second, colleges and universities offer price discounts to a large share of their admitted applicants through financial aid. So these discounts can be based on measured ability to pay or on the basis of perceived academic merit. So subsidies and subsidized loans are offered by federal and some state governments for purchase of this good as well. So these financial aid factors make it very difficult for someone studying the demand for higher education to measure the actual price that customers are paying. So finally, a college education is purchased over a period of more or less 4 years. So while it is easiest to examine the demand decisions of new freshmen, the persistence of these new students at the college over the remainder of their 4-year college career is equally important for their overall demand for the higher education product. So with their case study, they report that an own price elasticity of demand of negative 0.44 and an income elasticity of 1.20. A later study found that it was also broken down into private and public institutions on the elasticity of college tuition. So finding own price elasticities of negative 1.058 for public institutions and negative 0.6414 for private and for private institutions, as well as income elasticities for both public and private. So what we see from there is for the demand for a four-year college in their case study, the price elasticity was 0.44, which would make it an inelastic item. It's not very responsive to price changes. People still buy college educations no matter the price. There is an income elasticity of 1.20, so they would most likely consider that a luxury good. Public college had a price elasticity of 1.058, which was very, very close to 1, so we would probably call that unitary elastic. And an income elasticity also very, very close to 1, so we would call that a normal good. Private college, on the other hand, had a price elasticity of 0.64. We would most likely call that inelastic. However, the income elasticity was 1.701, showing that as a very much a luxury item. This next case study was from the National Library of Medicine, and they were talking about smokers. So one of the best examples of price elasticity occurred in the sales of cigarettes in South Africa. So between 1961 and 1991, cigarette excise taxes declined in real terms by 72%, which led to a 45% decline in real prices. So South Africa got rid of excise taxes on cigarettes, which led to a price reduction for the cost of cigarettes. So as a result, consumption increased by 245%. However, since 1991, taxes have increased by 535% and prices by 245%. So for 30 years, prices went down on cigarettes, consumption went up. So now that South Africa understood the harmful effects of cigarettes, they started taxing it again. So they increased taxes exponentially, and starting in 1991, prices go up at the same token, and then causing a 43% decline in consumption since 1991. As a benefit, the increase in tax revenues from 91 to 2016 was 238%. So government increased taxes on a product that they knew was harmful to customers to try to curb them from doing it. But at the same time, even though consumption went down, they did make more money in tax revenues. So it was a net win for the government. And three more very quick case studies on elasticity. The price elasticity of demand for luxury cars. They conducted this research team conducted market research and found that the price elasticity of demand for their product was a -2. That means for every 1% increase in price, they can expect a 2% decrease in demand for luxury cars. So based on that information, for this case study, the manufacturer estimated that a 10% increase in their price for a specific luxury car will lead to a 20% decrease in demand for that luxury car. Another case study was in regards to prescription medications. So there was a case study where a pharmaceutical company decided to increase the price of a life-saving medication by 15%. So they conduct research and find that the price elasticity of demand for this medication is -0.5. So this means that for every 1% increase in price, they can expect a 0.5% decrease in demand. So based on that information, the company estimated that a 15% increase in price will result in a 7.5% decrease in demand for the medication. And finally, a fast food case study where a popular fast food chain decided to decrease the price of their signature burger by 20%. So they found that the price elasticity of demand for their burger is -1.5, or we would say 1.5, positive value. So this means that for every 1% decrease in price, they can expect a 1.5 increase in demand. Price goes down, demand goes up. So based on this information, the fast food chain estimated that a 20% price decrease will lead to a 30% increase in demand for their signature burger.